folk radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Good evening. All right, how you doing? Today's Thursday, August 22nd, 2019. 233 days into the new year. Just 132 days left. We are live from a bunker. Yeah, from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is crackin'? Been waiting for tonight? Because tonight we are going to discuss the new documentary, the new film. It is called Extraordinary, The Seeding. We've got director Jon Sumple. Actually, Jon is live with us from Peru tonight. How cool is that? And writer Jack Roth will also be here. We're going to discuss the making of the film. I've seen it 2.5 times. Yeah, 2.5 times. It is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's amazing. So, we're going to discuss the impact of this film because there is going to be a lot of that. The impact on audiences worldwide when they see a film like this. For most, I'm going to talk about this in a minute. For most out there, they may have heard about alien abductions. You know, a lot. You know, I'd say the majority of the planet has heard of these things. You know, but it gets dismissed, and that's fine. People move on. But to see this film and the way that they have put the experiencers together to discuss it, also those that have been studying the phenomena, we'll go through all of that tonight. In the way that it is done, it's an eye-opener, and it's a film that had to have eventually been made. Well, it is here, and tonight both Jon and Jack and myself are going to discuss every angle of this potential program that is going on right now worldwide. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, it is Extraordinary, The Seeding. What a great week on the show. The film, it's about abductions, reproduction experiments, memories of seeing children off planet. Are aliens involved in a complex hybridization project where humans are used to cultivate a hybrid population? Through analysis with global ufology experts, Extraordinary, The Seeding explores hybridization, why it's happening, and the impact on humanity. Tonight, the director of Extraordinary, The Seeding, Jon Sumple, is here, live from Peru. And writer Jack Roth joins us from Florida. and we're going to discuss the making of the film and its possible impact on audiences worldwide. And let's bring in Jon first. Jon, are you there? Oh, Jon is dead in Peru. Jon, are you there? Let's bring in Jack. Jack, are you there?
I'm here.
I am.
I'm here.
Okay. Oh, we got Jon. Jon forgot to turn on his mic again. That's all.
I did.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great, thanks.
Oh,
Doing great.
yeah. See, one of you is going to stand in the corner. That was test number one. Now, let's do this first. You guys get the first-time guest disclaimer. Okay? Are you ready? Which is, it's just the three of us sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends. But we're going to end as friends. There you go. It's a tradition that goes back years. And if I didn't do it, the first-time guest disclaimer, Twitter lights up, and then I'm forced into doing it after the break and embarrassing myself. But there you go. Welcome to the program, and thank you for rescheduling from last week. And that was the first time that had ever happened in the history of this show. And I just couldn't figure out a way to sit in the chair for 3 hours. And it just wasn't going to happen. But we did it tonight. So welcome. And let's actually get started. I want to do this first. Jon, you're down in Peru. Are you researching or are you just vacationing?
No, my wife and I are on an open-ended travel journey. And so we left the States a little over a year ago, on August 1st of last year. And it's just an open-ended travel journey. We both work remotely. Our paying jobs, so to speak,
right,
allow us the ability to, as long as there's Wi-Fi, we can be there. We made the decision because we crunched some numbers and realized it was more expensive to live in Seattle than it was to do what we're doing now. So we made the jump.
Rita, did you hear that? It's time to sell the house. We can live remotely and do the show from around the world. Wow, that would be cool. That would be cool. And Jack, you're out in Florida, so you are an East Coaster?
I am.
And the two of you getting this film together, Jon is working remotely. How do you pull that off? Is it because of the convenience of email and transferring files, or did you guys actually get together and work face to face in country?
We most of this is done remotely. We get together. Jack and I spend an awful lot of time on the phone after our team helps cull all the opportunities for us to screen. So I've been asked, and I would have done this anyway, to give a shout out to the other Jamie Cernoff, our other producer. Jack, Jamie, and I founded J3 Films back in 2011.
Right.
And we're the producers and founders, and Lori Wagner is also one of our producers. And without the four of us, J3 Films really wouldn't be able to do what it does. But also a big shout out to our editor, Patrick Lumentini, director of photography, Ray Cerna. There's a whole bunch of other people who are involved behind the scenes that are huge support to us. But it is a virtual business, more or less. Jamie's in New Jersey, Lori's in L.A., in South America, Jack's in Orlando, Patrick's in L.A. area, and Ray is in Costa Rica. So we come together when it comes time to do the production, and then we go our separate ways, and all the other communication after that is done through file sharing, phone calls, Skype sessions, you name it, for whatever time it takes to get it together. But there's a ton of communication. You know, we might as well be together because we're always communicating with each other.
One of the things that I enjoy about film, first off, I live in Hollywood, right? So I'm in the middle of the film world. But I look at editing when I watch a film. I look at the aesthetics, the cinematography, the graphics, the artwork, the titling. You know, I look at all of that to appreciate or not appreciate how well a film is put together, because that says a lot about the team. with a subject matter like this, where we're discussing the hybridization of the human race, you need to do exactly what I see in this film, which is have extraordinary editing, a world-class production, the titling, the imaging, the artwork, of course, the cast. But today, you have to be really good to compete. But this is a world-class film. It's won a lot of awards and things. But who calls the shots on that? Because the design of the film is really, really good.
Yeah, we're lucky. We're lucky in that we have just a great team. And what part of this too is John and I have known each other for over 20 years. And we've been kind of dabbling in this for a long time, certainly talking about it for a very long time. And between who he knows and who I know, we've been able to put this incredible team together. And another quick shout out, Joe Mandia is the one who did all those illustrations. He's a phenomenal illustrator and someone I've known for over 20 years. So what we do is what usually happens is John and I have discussions and we kind of take a deep dive into some subject matter and we figure out what's the story we really want to tell. And once we decide on what the story is, we all wear our different hats at that point and we make it happen. I've always known them from the day I met John. He was directing corporate videos and he always had that director's eye. And I was always more of a producer and a writer. So, together we make we cover a lot of ground. And then the other people we bring in and we have been able to bring in are just really good at what they do. Because, these things aren't huge budgets, as you know. I mean, we don't have millions and millions of dollars, so we gotta make the best with what we have as far as financially goes. So, but we've been lucky, and I think a big part of that is we've known each other a really long time, and we kind of know how each other think.
Well, okay. So who put this on the table? And the reason why I ask, because this can be approached one of two ways. First off, very touchy subject. That's the first thing. The second thing is you can go on the light side of this and still make a good film, or you can go to where this film needs to go, but can be shocking at points. In fact, it's shocking all the way through the film. So whose idea was it? And then second, who put it on the table? And then who pushed it to into the direction of we're not going to hold back?
Well, I'll give Jack a lot of credit for what was put on the table, because when we made our first film, Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story, he said, even though we're focusing a lot on, Stan and the evidence in his story, because it's important to get it out there so that people can see that, the compendium of evidence that he had accumulated over the years. But he said, this is all about the kids. This is all about the children. And he said that, when we move to the next story, we need to make sure that we go deeper into the children. So that was a driving force for the second film, because we had heard stories about this back in 2011, 2012, and we kind of threw around like, yeah, this would be something that we should look into. We talked about doing, putting together a concept for a TV show where you explored for half an hour one person's story, then a half an hour another person's story about unexplained pregnancies and what they had gone through. And we eventually, migrated to the documentary film. And we were asked by The Orchard, now 1091 Media, to do a follow-up to the first film. And I did want to say one thing in regards to the production values. Our budget for the first film was very low budget. Majority of the editing the storytelling was done by me, and I'm not an editor by trade. But this film is light years ahead of where the first film was, and that a lot of that has to do with Patrick Lomatini, the editor. Patrick and I spent a lot of time on the phone talking about the style, of the film, and once we got that groove, it just kind of took off from there. He just did all the polishing and made it look fantastic. The musical score from Anton Patzner is phenomenal. It's wall-to-wall sound. He scored the entire thing. As Jack mentioned, Joe Mandia's illustrations, came to life and gave the film another element of authenticity and value. So it really was, we wanted to raise the bar. We said we needed to, our budget for the second film was more than double what it was for the first film, and it shows. Not that it's a lot, it's still a small budget. And that another shout out to the people that we work with. They're passionate about what we're doing, and they're willing to do things at a steep discount if you were to look at the industry standard. So we're really proud of the team, as Jack mentioned. But what really changed, I think, as far as the story is concerned, for me personally, because after the first film was made, I was like, I don't know if I ever want to do another film in this genre, because is this how I want to be known? I really thought that the first one would get my foot in the door. And this is my selfish point of view, is that I would be able to work on other things too. But when the opportunity to do a second one came in, we said, okay, let's move forward with this. Here's the story we want to tell. Jack and I spent a ton of time on the front end, developing the storyline based on the people that we talked to. But when we're doing the interviews is really where I felt the transformational moment, because I realized in talking to the individuals that their stories were more important than the phenomena. The reaction to the humanity was what this story needed to be about. And we talked about it, after we were done with the shoot and finished our production in LA back last spring. And it was very apparent. And I was just like, yeah, this is what we have to do. And we were all 100% in agreement that we're moving into more of an emotional human story than we were about the phenomena itself.
So it was Jack that put the idea out there first?
Yeah, because he was adamant. Adamant about the children's story as it pertained to Stan's. And not that anybody disagreed with him, but he made it very clear that this is the basic story. You boil it down to, this is what it is. It's about the next generation, and what is that next generation? These children play a key role into where we go from here as humanity,
certainly,
and as cosmic beings.
Yeah, and John, your knowledge of the subject about ET hybridization and seeding, your knowledge of that subject going into it was at one spot. What did you learn as the movie started to get together that you didn't know before? Those life-changing things. What did you find out?
Well, I would say that, another thing that is important to this too is that Jack had done a lot of research. So when he first came to me in 2009 and said, let's do a documentary film. We were originally going to do something where we're going to travel around the Southwest and go to different locations and talk to the people in those areas to get their perspective of what happened. And then the Romanek story came up, and that put us, square one with that story. Like, this is where this is a great jumping off point. So at that point in time, I was not a deep dive person in ufology. I was a believer. I had 3 sightings when I was a kid, so this was never an issue for me. Mm-hmm. But I was not someone who was steeped in the research side. Jack had done a lot of research over the years, from his childhood all the way up to when we were talking about doing a documentary film. But for me, where I think this has been a good thing is because our one of our tenets for J3 Films is that we want to make films that reach the masses. We don't want to just target a demographic that already believes, because that there's no value there from trying to raise, people's awareness to something that may be happening.
Right.
So we wanted to reach the widest audience possible. So we said, how are we going to do that? So let's keep the stories about, and the questions about the things that people who were not well-versed would ask, the things that they would want to know. So I've kind of walked wide circles around getting into the deep side, so that I do have that sense of, curiosity and wonder of somebody who doesn't really understand all of it. So I've learned a heck of a lot in the last 9-10 years for sure. But I would say the transformational thing for me was that I have never spent as much time with multiple individuals who had shared deeply disturbing, emotional, and I would say to a certain extent, physiological and psychological impacts. And I had no idea, sorry there, my mic just fell. And I had no idea that these stories were that impactful. PTSD, things that had happened to people years ago, they still wonder about and are still disturbed about. They're still shaken by these things. So I spent a lot of time, my story, and I'm sure Jack's is very similar, is that, when you hear it from someone who's been through it, you're faced with that in that moment is, do I believe them or do I not? And I would say that during the making of this film, I got no reason to not believe. Every single time I spoke with somebody, I truly believed that they were telling me the truth. And part of that is that we spend so much time vetting them on phone calls, numerous hours of phone calls for each person that's in the film. Mm-hmm. And then, when we sat down and interviewed them, it was anywhere from 2-3 hours to 8-9 hours for the individuals that were in the film. So yeah, it was an eye-opening thing for me to truly see that emotional impact up front and center.
And Jack, as the writer of the film and through your research, I have noticed a change in the way that abductions and things were discussed very openly in the 50s, and in the 60s, and Betty and Barney Hill. They went through their trials and their dark periods, but the world was discussing it. They made a film, right? And going into the 70s, we had lots of abductions. It was covered, and of course, Travis Walton and so many others. But here we are in 2019, where it is probably discussed less today, where we have such an open society that it seems like everything gets discussed. So as the writer, now that's your challenge, right? How to get people to start discussing this film, and you need to approach it from that way. I would assume that was a concern.
Well, it's a social taboo.
Right.
And I think that the mainstream media and whoever's pulling the strings has done a great job of making it a taboo subject. And they've made it extremely difficult for people to come forward and say, hey, I was abducted by ETs. It's almost impossible for people to do that. And, yes, and I'm glad you bring up Betty and Barney Hill, because I remember growing up, and that was the one case when I heard about that really got me into this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started the deep dive, because I was absolutely fascinated by that story. But it took so much courage for them to come out and here was a biracial couple who was in a very conservative environment back then, and they came out and said this happened to us. That took an enormous amount of bravery. But yeah, I think that nothing's really improved. And I think when we first sat down with this, we realized that people were going to they were going to feel comfortable about talking about it, or they weren't, and some were going to be on the fence. And that's where Jon and I, with the help of our other producers, we were putting people together and getting them on the phone and just talking to them, having a kind of conversation we're having right now. And literally, we'd say the same kind of thing that you said at the beginning of the show. It's funny. It's like, look, we're just chatting here. Pretend we're in a bar having a beer. Pretend we're on our living room on the couch just talking, just sitting there having a conversation. And when people open up about this, it's extremely difficult for them, especially the ones that never have told their story too much before, mm-hmm. leading up to it. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, we spoke to dozens and dozens of people. We vetted them just to make sure that their stories were sound and they were credible and et cetera. But for every one of the people you see in the film, and a lot of the others that spoke to us and for whatever reason didn't wind up in the film, it takes there is nothing good that comes out of coming forward and saying that you are an experiencer, except for the fact that you're helping other experiencers. You're helping other people who have had these same experiences, have a group, have that people that they can connect to, people that they can relate to. That means a lot to them. So, yeah, it was a process, and John and I knew that, look, we just have to talk to these people, see how they feel about it. But what's funny? A lot of people feel like they're tired of it. They're tired of not being able to talk about it.
Hey guys,
they're tired.
Hey guys, I'm gonna interrupt. Guess who just called me on the phone? I've got him on speaker. Jim Martin.
Oh, no way.
Hey, Jim. Yes. Say hi to Jon Sumple and Jack Roth. We're live on the air right now.
Come on.
Yes.
Hey there.
What's up, Jim?
Well, those are good guys. Jimmy, I got your message. I didn't mean to interrupt your show.
Yeah, you're live on the air now, and we're talking about your new film, man, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate the support, and I'm glad to have John and Jack there tonight.
Yeah. And with that, now that we just totally threw Jim under the bus, he had no idea, guys. This is fun. Hey, Jim, I'll have my people call your people, and let's talk tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys.
Have a good night.
That's awesome.
That's Jim Martin, the vice president of 1091 Films, formerly The Orchard, and your distributor. He's a great guy.
Yeah, we have to give a big shout out to him too, because the short story of our journey to being on the phone with you tonight was that we made the film about Stan. We debuted it at a film festival in 2013, February of 2013, or November of 2013, and then by February of 2014, Stan had flipped the pen cap with Peter Maxwell Slattery and had his arrest, which basically we felt killed our film, and the timing couldn't have been worse for us. So we had to go through a self-distribution as opposed to finding, a traditional distribution. But 3 years later, out of the blue, I get a phone call from Jim saying, "Hey, I saw your film. I've been a big fan of it. We'd love to distribute it." And it was like, huh? What?
Let me tell you what's cool about Jim, and since he's not listening. Let me tell you what and for this audience to understand, we're talking about the head of a major film company, number one, right? That is taking chances on getting vision out there, and he believes in this community. But that guy, Jim, he goes to all the conferences, he low keys it. He's walking around listening to all kinds of presenters. He's not acting like, he's not pulling up in a Lamborghini and playing that Hollywood part. And I made him one time during a conversation. I said, man, just talk to me like a Hollywood studio head once. Let me make sure, because you're not that guy. You're one of us. No. And he said, I am. No. And I got to give him mad props. He knows a lot about the subject. And there's nothing that you can't talk to him about that he not only would get behind it and support it, it's that he's one of us. And that's rare in Hollywood.
Yeah, he's passionate for sure. And we found that out very quickly, that he supported the genre and has had success with it within, it's a little niche within 1091 media. And he's been able to make it work and has found the right audiences and, has been really good. One of the things, we were ready to strangle him this past January, because we had originally talked about having the film released in November of last year, but we pushed that out last summer. We knew that we were going to push it out. Then it was going to be in February, and then it pushed from February to June, and then from June to now. And we were like, can we get this thing out already? We're ready to go. But he said, the longer ramp you have, the better time it will be for people to hear your story. And he was right.
He's absolutely right. What is the official release date?
It is September 3rd. It's less than 2 weeks at so that's the Tuesday morning after Labor Day weekend. So stay up after your long weekend at 3 a.m. on the morning of the 3rd. The film will be available on digital networks.
There you go. So, now we need to take a break right here, and when we come back, I'm going to set you up, the both of you, for the return. What do you think? I'm gonna ask John this first, but Jack, we'll give you an opportunity to jump in. We have 3 minutes. John, what do you think the reaction is going to be from outside of this community? Are you prepared for that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, the people who don't believe won't believe, and that's fine. And we're not looking to convert anybody. But the people who have not given much thought to this, when they see something that is this, I don't want to say it's an emotional film, but it connects with you emotionally. So I think there will be a lot of people who've never really given a lot of thought to this, who will say, "Wow, I need to look into this a little bit more."
And Jack, what do you think the reaction is going to be outside of the community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, debunkers will always be debunkers, but I think the people in the middle of the bell curve are going to hopefully look at it, watch it, and say, wow, okay, I did not know that. You know what? I might have to look at this. I might have to do my own research and find out more. That would be perfect.
Let's take our break right here. Great start to the show. This is Fade to Black. Our guests tonight, Jon Sumple and Jack Roth, the director and writer of the new film, Extraordinary, The Seeding, releasing in 2 weeks on September 3rd. We'll be right back after this short break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, the director of Extraordinary, The Seeding, Jon Sumple, is here, and the writer, Jack Roth, are both joining us discussing this new film. And I kind of want to go here. There's so many different directions we can go in right now, but I would like to break down a couple of pretty sensitive subjects that don't really get discussed, and the reason why is because it's sensitive, and most people don't discuss these parts of their lives when ET is not involved, right? Let alone you bring in abductions and ET into this kind of subject matter. It's very sensitive, and it's shocking. It's shocking. But I want to specifically talk about Sierra. How did you guys find her? Either one.
Well, we found her. We met her through when we were doing research and working on the Stan Romanek story. And we had met her at an event, and we had heard about her and a little bit about her story. And we were at an event where Stan was actually speaking at, and we were all there, and we met Sierra. And I remember we had a break, and we went outside, and John, Sierra, and I sat there and started talking, and it was her story. Your jaw hits the ground when she tells her story, and she's an amazing person. And it was just the profound emotional impact it had on John and I. We couldn't believe it, and we were like, you know what? We need to tell your story. More people need to know about your story. Yeah, she's an incredible person, and her life is extremely unique and something that I've never heard of before.
Was it difficult for not only her, but for you guys to start to discuss? Well, okay. Well, who is she and her background? There's a reason why it is an incredible story.
Well, we didn't go too deeply into the individual stories because we would have needed to have done a series. But her story, she has a military background. She had an abduction experience after she was no longer in the military, but still doing, in reserve duty. And she's a lifelong lesbian, has never been with a man before. She had a very vivid abduction experience one night where, she tells the story. But one of the things that's interesting to me and all of us too is that every time you hear her tell her story, nothing changes. So to me, that's kind of like an indication that when you hear the same thing over and over and the story is, to a T, the same thing every single time, there's a lot of truth that comes from that. When you hear people tell stories and it's a little bit different every single time, you start to wonder, is there some fabrication or embellishment to it? But she never. We heard her story told on 3 different occasions over the course of 2 different years in 3 different meetings with her, talking first with us and then with other people, and nothing really changed with that. But her, long story short, she's with in bed, going to bed at night, and her girlfriend, she says, usually got up in the middle of the night, and it said it used to really aggravate her because she would go into the bathroom, flip the light switch on, leave the light on, and then close the door. So she was like, why can't she go in there, shut the door, then turn the light on? So she said that was a pet peeve of hers. But this night she went in, she shut the door, turned the light off, or turned the light on, and Sierra saw something at the foot of her bed. And then there was an experience where she felt like her body was being scanned. And she said that eventually she looked at the clock and it was a couple of hours later. And her girlfriend came back into bed and said, my ass is sore. I've been sitting on the toilet. It seems like I've been in here forever. The next morning they had a guest that had been staying with them, and they said that the guest said, I heard some noises and I went to go up and knock on your door, and the next thing I knew, I don't remember what happened after that. So there were 2 people who were in the presence of her in her vicinity that had kind of like missing time as a result of what had happened with her. But the next day she said, I knew something was different, and she says, I felt like they impregnated me. And she had some friends come over, and she said, yep, she was definitely pregnant, and she kept the baby for 3 months, almost 3 months. And she said she was very much in the belief that this was something related to the military, and she's like, I'm going to keep this baby. I know what's going on here, and they're not going to take this baby from me. And she said no matter what she did, surrounded herself with a lot of love and light. She's a big believer in the positive energy thing, and she said that she wanted to keep the child, and woke up one morning and she says it was gone.
Well, now we need to back up here, because you kind of went right past what makes her story so bleeping incredible, is that she's a lesbian. She's living with her girlfriend. She doesn't have sex with men. Therefore, she shouldn't be pregnant ever, right? Okay, let's not dance around this. And for her to turn up pregnant, now her personal life, she's got to answer for this. Now, it's one thing to come up with a story, but it's another thing to go down the ET path here, which is actually what had happened. And that in her personal life is completely ruined because of this abduction.
Yeah, she said it put a lot of stress on her relationship for sure.
And the other part, as this moved along, she recounts, and I'd never heard anything like this, and I want you to expand on it. And I'm sure that there's more background than what is presented in the film, but she gets connected into like the UFO underground, right, where they're going to make sure that she has this baby. So she goes from, if I'm understanding correctly, she like goes from handler to handler, right?
Well, what happened was she's a fire plug. I mean, she's a real warrior, and she really is. And when she had this experience, and then all of a sudden there was no baby anymore. She wasn't pregnant anymore, and the baby was gone. She was pissed off, and she wanted answers. So she tried to use her military connections to get answers, and she started asking questions, apparently to the right people, because one day she went outside and there was a black car there with a couple of military guys there to pick her up. And she kind of knew. She was like, okay, I'm just going to get in and do what they tell me to do. And they wound up taking her, according to what she's told us, they took her to underground facility in the Colorado Springs area and showed her a couple things. They showed her some technology that was way beyond anything we have had. We have, or supposedly have, and they showed her an ET body of a tall gray ET, and then they also showed her this huge hangar. This was like an enormous airplane hangar, but the size of about probably 4 football fields. And in that hangar were a bunch of experimental aircraft, and in the middle was a typical disc-shaped, like a UFO disc-shaped object, metallic object that was just kind of floating with some kind of anti-gravity that she assumed technology. But what was really interesting about her experience is that these guys she had 2 escorts with her. They went to room to room, showed her these things, and then they took her to this conference room. And they let her sit in the conference room for like an hour, just sitting there. And this guy was behind her the whole time as she sat and looked forward. And the purpose of that was to scare her to death. And she's, like I say, and John will back me up on this, she is a tough cookie. And she was horrified. She thought she was going to die. She thought, okay, now they're going to kill me. They showed me all this, and now no one's ever going to see me again. But they didn't. They just said, well, you were asking questions, now you know. But the implication was, now you know, so be quiet and stop asking.
The film then, at this point in the film, without giving anything away here, there's no spoilers, but you start to discuss not only the pregnancy side, because maybe we should actually discuss what seeding actually is and hybrids and hybridization. But the fetus disappears, and who was pregnant and was showing signs of being pregnant suddenly is not. And this is very difficult for people to watch and to understand and to wrap their mind around. What is happening with the fetus at 4 months?
Well, what these women are telling us is that they're having these quote unquote false pregnancies. So at 3 to 4 months, one day they're pregnant and the next day they're not. And a lot of times they talk about maybe perhaps that evening where they have another kind of abduction experience. Something strange happens, or they wake up really tired or really groggy. And all of a sudden women know their bodies, and they know that something's wrong. The baby's gone. So they'll go to the doctor, and the doctors will be perplexed always. They're like, well, this is very strange, but they'll say your body just absorbed it. You had a miscarriage and your body just absorbed the fetus. And women, a lot of them don't buy that. And because there's no evidence whatsoever of a miscarriage, none, zero. And what winds up happening is a little later down the road, it could be a couple of years later, these women again have an abduction experience. And they're taken on board craft, and they talk about in detail being taken on board, having this experience. And then on board these craft, they're introduced to these little children, and they almost immediately, the maternal instinct kicks in, and they recognize the child or children as their own, and they know it's their child. And the ETs in some kind of telepathic way ask them to nurture the child, this is your child, love the child, hug the child, nurture the child. And they do, and sometimes they do, sometimes they're in such a state of shock they don't do anything. But this happens, this story is told over and over and over again by women. And sometimes they're contacted by the children on Earth. It's earthbound. But most of the time it seems to be on some kind of craft where these children are being raised or kept. Again, the profound emotional impact that it has on these women and men too. Also men. It's happened to Stan. It happens to some other men we talk to, because they're using the men as well in this hybridization program, these programs, and they're extracting their DNA, their sperm, and they're concocting whatever this cocktail of DNA, and they're creating these hybrid children. So the children also belong to the men, the human men. And this is what seems to be happening. This is what people are remembering. But the one thing I can say that I would kind of stress is that it is incredibly emotional for these people to go through this experience.
Now, I'm not a doctor, okay? I'm not. Oh, man. But I have never heard, I'm not saying it doesn't occur, but I have never heard about a fetus being absorbed after a miscarriage, that the body just consumes it. Is this something that is out there? Did you guys research this and look into this?
Well, we did try to connect with physicians to get somebody to go on the record.
Right.
And I know that people would be like, oh, yeah, sure, right. But we did. We reached out to a half a dozen different people to see if they would be willing to talk to us. And a couple of them never responded, even though we were told to reach out to them. Another person declined before we even got a chance to get him on the phone. And then finally got somebody on the phone and had several conversations with him, trying to set up a time to get him to sit down and talk with us. Long story short there, he opted out. He just eventually got to the point where he said, I don't know if this is the right thing for me to do. But he told me, in phone conversations, that I have experienced this with patients in the past. I have had women who've come to me who were pregnant, and it had all of a sudden the fetus was gone. And he said, the typical response in the medical industry is, the body absorbs it. So we're talking about, something that happens to women where there's, like Jack mentioned earlier, there's no signs of a miscarriage. When there's a miscarriage, women know. And this is something where it's like the fetus is gone, the baby is gone. Mm-hmm. We even had one person in the film, Maren Maston, talk about she went to have a scan and ultrasound done, and the tech that was there kind of mentioned something like, and she's like, what? And he said, oh, it's just a little bit odd. You have a fully intact placenta, but there's nothing in it type of thing. So she was just like, it's one of those things where you kind of like, you hear people talk about it, but they don't go further. They don't really share anything with them. And part of it is because they don't want to get pulled into something that they're not an expert in. They're not going to try to figure something out. They're going to try to use some sort of, and again, I'm not an expert like you, I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one, but, we attempted to get somebody to go on the record to talk about this, but I can see how it would be something that would be kind of like a career suicide type of thing if you get labeled as the guy who says, women are having, alien fetuses extracted from their stomachs.
I'm going to look into this. I'm also going to defer this over to the audience too as well. If you got any information on this, post it up in Twitter. And if there's any doctors out there too as well listening, which there are, I would like to know. I don't know if it's common or rare, but a fetus to be absorbed by the female body and then just disappear. That was a stunner for me. It was a stunner. What are the numbers when we talk about this? I know Yvonne pointed out that famous poll that came out a couple of years ago, and I talked about it on the show when it did, that 1 in 50 adults polled said that they think that they may have been abducted. And I remember when that poll came out, I thought that's an unbelievable number, because if there's 375 million people in the United States, and we're looking at 1 in 50, well, this is something that right. needs to be talked about. But worldwide, millions is one number. How many of these cases do you think are actually happening?
I think that when you think about, from a global perspective, and this is a question that comes up, it's like, why does it always seem to be in the U.S.? Well, I think, a part of it is, one, there's a lot of people in the U.S. Two, there is an appetite for this in the U.S., and therefore there is more conversations around it. And there are people doing like what we're doing, looking for answers, and radio shows like what you're doing, trying to have conversations about these things. But the fact of the matter is, there's documented cases of people all over the world who share very similar stories, as to what happened to them while they were during the abduction process. So when you think about it from that point of view, it's the remote corners of the world, and it's also in high rises in large cities where this is happening. But specific to the missing pregnancy or the sudden, the fetus gone missing, we talked with Yvonne and Barbara, who were Barbara Lamb and Yvonne Smith, who were in the film, and they said, hundreds of cases that they've had just by themselves each, where they've come across this, and almost everybody that we talked to on the investigator side has heard numerous cases as well. So you just start to extrapolate, from a dozen people who are in a film saying that they're aware of these things, and the numbers are big. Just go and do research on any person who does regression therapy, and you're going to find people who talk about abductions all the time. So the numbers are probably pretty big. And like you said, the 1 in 50, that's a pretty big number. 7 million people,
yeah,
or 70 million people, right? No, 7 million people. 7 million people is a big number.
Just in the United States, and it's not it's not a United States phenomenon.
No.
And I don't need to go there, but so much is focused on the United States. And if you're ET coming from interstellar space, you're not looking at borders here. Let's go to the United States. No. Let's go to Vegas. It's not about that. They go anywhere in the world. Now, let me. Okay, we got time for this. Alejandro Rojas is in the film, Mark D'Antonio's in the film, and Richard Dolan. Now, those three guys are three of the most black and white people that I know. And we were talking earlier, right? The word pragmatic comes up. And to have those three speak about this in the film, I think is a really big deal. It adds a lot to the film as far as a street cred point of view for those inside of the community. But those three guys outside of the community, when people hear them speak, they stop and they listen because of the way that they approach the subject. But this also is out of their wheelhouse, right? Mm-hmm. How open were they to talk about this subject?
Well, it was critical for us to, when we do these things, we're telling the human story. So we're having the experiencers tell their stories, but we know it's critical to also get people like Alejandro and Richard, the people who have done the research, done years of research, written books, have PhDs, are scientists, are like you say, very credible people, very intelligent people who can speak intelligently about this subject matter. And we knew we had to balance that with that. But what was great about them, and this was we love doing these interviews because we sit there and we get excited. We know we're going to interview Alejandro, Richard, and Mark we had never met before. And that turned out to be also a phenomenal interview. But they talk so objectively about it, but they're open. They're all open to it. And they're like, you know what? I've spoken to hundreds or dozens of people who have told me their stories, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is. Even someone like Richard Dolan, who is just, researched this. Again, one of the most famous and credible researchers in this field probably ever. And as much research as he's done, he's like, I don't have any answers, but I will say this. People need to consider this. We need to think about it. We need to have more discussions about this. And that's what was so great about having those guys in this. And John, I know that you especially with someone like Mark D'Antonio, who is an astronomer, I think he had just phenomenal insight on this. John?
Yeah, their willingness to engage with us from the very beginning was, someone like Mark, we didn't know him. We had worked with Alejandro before. We had made a connection with Richard and had a chance to talk with him through some other people that we knew and was able to get him, interested. But everything starts with a phone call. And one of the things about each one of them, Alejandro we knew from the first film, so it was relatively simple to have that initial conversation with him for the second film. But we were on the phone with Richard for 3 hours when we first wanted to tell him about what we wanted to do. And I had 2 separate conversations with Mark. Jack was on one of them and I was on another one with him. About 6 hours of phone call, conversations with him. So when you look at the amount of time that we're investing on the front end with the people that we're talking to, we want to make sure they really understand what our objectives are in doing this. It wasn't a matter of, we'll figure it out as we go. It was like, we want your insight. We want your take on this, whether it's pro or con. It adds value to have both sides of any story, in a film like this, because, most people have, I shouldn't say most people, a lot of people have said, well, this, you guys are, telling a story that's specific to an agenda that you want to deliver. It's like, no, not really. We're just not doing deep dive investigative stories to debunk something, or to prove something. What we want to do is expand awareness, expand thought, have, insightful conversations about something that very well make a lot of people uncomfortable. But if these things are really happening to millions of people, it makes a lot of sense for the rest of humanity to pay credence to what's being said, what's being shared, and to also notice the impact that this is having on the individuals who go through those experiences. That was a critical point for us in this film, is that it turned from being about phenomena and evidence to we need to care about the people and listen to the people and provide support for the people who've been through these profound experiences.
Let's take a break right here. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We're discussing Extraordinary, The Seeding with director Jon Sumple and writer Jack Roth. We'll continue this conversation right after this short break. Stay with us. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. Tonight, we're discussing the new film, Extraordinary, The Seeding, with director Jon Sumple and writer Jack Roth. Now, a program of this size, right? A global program, a global seeding program of the human race can't go unnoticed by our governments and different state actors around the world, and certainly the United States government. Are they involved?
Well, we actually are going to get much more into that aspect of this in our next film. And that's part of this whole journey that we're taking audiences on. But what we found, there are a couple people in the film, in the film that's coming out, that talk about a government presence as in part in the abduction experience, and whether it's with ETs or not, there seems to be a government presence. And I mean, objectively speaking, and then again, John and I both, obviously we don't know the answers to this, but we tend to, I can speak for myself and say, I think that they not only do they know, but that somehow they have a hand in this. But what that is, it's hard to say, and I wouldn't even want to, suggest anything. But I will say this: we have started to speak to ex-military people, and they're going to be in our next film. But we've had long conversations with them, and they're, you might call them whistleblowers if you want, but they talk about being involved in programs that involved ETs, whether that's crash retrieval or communication or something else. So it highly suggests that obviously the government is not only aware of these things, but that they have some sort of contact or communication with these ETs.
John, what do you make of that aspect of it, where you're talking to somebody about their abduction experience, and as they reveal the intricacies and the logistics of it, because there's always that part, they will. It seems very common to hear them mention, well, I was there. There was a couple of ETs in the room. I was there, and in the background, looked like somebody was in an Air Force officer's uniform, right? And you hear this over and over again. What do you think is going on?
Well, it's disturbing, and I would say that was one of I would say there was two moments when we were doing these interviews, more than two, but two specific to the military that just, gut-wrenching, jaw-dropping. I mean, as sitting there interviewing somebody and listening to them recount a story with, you're tearing up and you can't help it because they're sharing something so visceral. But two of the people in the film, Niera Isley and April Malloy, both said that they had experiences where they were having penetrative sex, and there were other people in the room watching them, some civilians and some beings. Can you imagine what that emotional impact would be, not only to the person that's having it, but to carry it forward knowing that there were other people in the room witnessing this? The first question that you ask is well, and I should say, in addition to the civilians, the military personnel. So why? What is the purpose of that? We don't know the answer to that, but to hear something like that from more than one person, and that we only interviewed a half dozen or 9 people specific to the abduction experience, talked to about 30 in total, and 2 of the people that we had on camera had experiences of penetrative sex with a being and being witnessed. I can't fathom that, and I just cannot even begin to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's gone through that. So that's when I kind of think about this, is we need to, as human beings, be compassionate towards people who've been, whether we understand it or not, whether we believe it or not, if it was real to them and they've suffered some sort of a trauma in their life, and some of these people have been diagnosed with PTSD. If they've gone through something like that, we need to listen. We need to be there for them. We need to, give them a hug, for Christ's sake. That's what I think was a very important thing for me learning through this process, was these are real people that have been ostracized for something that they never raised their hand for. They didn't volunteer for it. They have been taken against their will, have had a traumatic experience, and society shuns them. I think that's atrocious.
And what do we do? And you're going to have this inevitably over and over again in the weeks and months ahead, where whether it's somebody from the media or otherwise that are going to say, look, they're making it up, right? It's some kind of mental illness. This is not real. What's your answer? You know what? I'll give you a chance to practice because
no, that's absurd. And I think the reason for that is, look, and that's the problem, and one of the best lines, and we always go back to this in the film that we love, was someone had said, if it doesn't happen to you, it's just a story. So of course, it just doesn't have the impact that because it didn't happen to you. So, but to suggest that, that's like saying mass hallucination. Everyone's having a mass hallucination. That's the easy way to explain it away.
Right.
And it's truthfully, it's an insult to our intelligence. If you think about it objectively and in a logical manner, that's insulting. It's not only insulting to the people who are having these experiences, but it's also insulting to the free-thinking, intelligent human being who's like, wow, it's never happened to me, but boy, this is horrible. This would be a horrible thing to happen. And I think it's a way for people to just make excuses for things that they don't understand. It's very scary. So if you don't understand something, this is human nature. This is all part, and that's one thing everyone on the team, everyone on our crew, we've sat down and we've talked about this over many, many meals. And this is part of the human condition, all of it. The fact that these people are having these very these strange experiences, these horrifying, stressful experiences, and also the fact that people are ridiculing them. It's all part of how human beings behave. But what we need to do, and Jon makes the point of all points, and the reason we're doing this is that people need to be more empathetic to other people and what they're going through. If someone comes back from a war and has PTSD, we feel for them. If someone loses a child and they're suffering from severe depression and anxiety, we feel for them. Well, why don't we feel for the people who are going through these horrible experiences and having anxiety and depression and PTSD? Why can't we feel for them? Because it's a socially taboo thing?
Yeah, it's completely taboo. And there's another extraordinary moment. I can't believe I just said extraordinary about a film called Extraordinary. But there's another extraordinary moment in the film where Mark D'Antonio brings up one of the best points that can be said about all of this. When somebody says why, right? Why are they doing this? And Mark says, look, we go out and tag, I think he says elk, right? Mm-hmm. We go out and tag an elk. We're not emotionally distressed over that. I'm paraphrasing here, but he's right. We go out and we're tagging sharks and whales and dolphins and elephants. That can't feel good, right? When you're shooting somebody with a gun into their skin and doing that, it can't be right. But nobody's losing sleep over it. And I'm sure that E.T. has got the very same mentality coming here and checking us out for whatever reason. They're not losing sleep over it. It's just what they're doing. They're exploring and doing their thing here on Earth, and they're doing it on many other planets too as well. We're not the only one. That's the best way to look at it, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things with that too is that you have to look at it from a much bigger perspective. So, we have a global centric way of thinking of things, an earthbound centric way. Once you start to extrapolate thought to more cosmic and universal and metaphysical and multidimensional, you have a completely different thought process. So one of the things that we explore in the next film, don't get off track here, but I think this is very important that people understand, and what we're terming EX3 because it doesn't have a title yet. The idea that there are a lot of people who believe in abductions. They believe in the lights in the sky have intelligent thought, intelligent beings behind it. They believe in abductions. They believe in hybridization. They believe in hybrid children. They believe that they're both off planet, and they believe that they're populating the Earth. There are three distinct groups, probably a lot more, but three distinct groups within that have a completely different paradigm of thought around that concept that I just explained. And one is the religious paradigm. The second one is the ascension paradigm, and the third one is kind of Dr. David Jacobs' sweet spot, which is colonization. All three of those are vastly different, even though they believe in the same premise, but their outcomes are different. And nobody really has those answers, do they? No. And we have made it very clear whenever we talk to anybody, we don't have the answers. What we're doing is try to present stories to the masses of people who've had experiences, both personal, both connected to the military, both connected to other people. I'll give you one little story that, to me, when you hear stories like this, they really resonate with you. One of the women that we interviewed for the film, she shares the story of being abducted. And it's not in the movie, but she shares a story of having an abduction experience. And she goes, I'm present in the woods nearby my house, and I'm walking through the woods, and I see this installation down in this little ravine, and I can see these grays going into this installation. And she says, they were busy. It was like they were ignoring me, but I could see them, off in the distance doing this. And then she said, I saw my next door neighbor, and where she lived was in farm country. So she said her next door neighbor is like, half a mile away. But she said, I saw my next door neighbor, and she said, I approached her and I saw that she was naked and she was crying. And she said that I felt, I was a little bit embarrassed for her because she was naked. And she goes, I'm kind of a humble person. So she goes, I kind of like held up a jacket for her, and I turned my head so that she could put the jacket on, and I was trying to comfort her. And then she said she remembers waking up back in her home, having this presence. Like, I had this experience. It was very visceral to me, but now I'm back home. The next morning, she has a knock on her door. She goes to the door, and it's her next door neighbor, horrified, and says to her, we met in the woods last night, didn't we?
Say what?
Yeah.
Right?
So you hear stories like that, corroborative stories. It's not just one individual. When you have two people saying something like that, it makes you, it literally, you have that moment of your head exploding, because I can't relate to that, and I can't discount it when two people are having corroborative stories. And I have to tell you too, that story is a future film, because what has happened, not just that is one tiny element of a much bigger thing that happened in southwestern Missouri back in the mid-90s. So this is something that we will likely explore down the road. But those are the type of stories that I don't think a lot of people hear. And one of the things that I would encourage people who are on the fence, or even if they're skeptics, spend time with somebody who's been through something like this, and then have a conversation with me and tell me that after spending, a day, a weekend, a week with an individual who's been through this, you have a chance to see that they're not crazy, that you have to see that they have highs and lows. You have to see that they're very intelligent and they're processing this and working through it in the best way that they know how. Then you have a much better appreciation. But to watch a film for an hour and 45 minutes, or see a piece of evidence that doesn't resonate with you and to dismiss it, that's closed-minded. So, I just don't understand people who will make judgment on one thing if they don't know the whole story.
And certainly we're talking about the most traumatic of traumatic experiences that one could possibly go through. And that's it. There isn't any other way to look at it than that. And how somebody deals with it is how somebody deals with it. If you look at, and I know you guys know Travis, you have a conversation with Travis and you sit down and you get to be with him, right? He is still dealing with that trauma. He's not cool with it, you know, and you can see it in his eyes, and that goes with anybody else that has gone through these experiences. The trauma has to be to the extreme, and empathy, that's just the starting point.
Yeah.
And you guys addressed that really well in the film too. And next, before we hit the break, we know that this is going on. We have enough testimony out there, but the question has to be why. And John, you just said that there's three distinct groups, or there's three distinct ideas. You can do that with anything, and you can certainly do that with the why question. You know, why are they doing this? But going through a seeding program, the first question that I have is just why not come over and take over the planet? You don't even need us. That would be that's one way to look at this. But why is this program in place? What are they doing it for?
Well, there are a lot of different theories on that, and as John had mentioned, three of the main kind of camps out there, and what they believe is the why. But the why is really the impetus for why we did this film, and we realize that if we're taking people on this journey of discovery, and we're looking for the truth, that you start out with seeing a light in the sky, seeing a strange light in the sky, or seeing a daylight disk, and then you go through these various phases of understanding of the phenomena, and you go deeper and deeper. But the why, more importantly, is what are the implications of the why? And what I mean by that is the reason they're doing it, whether it's for colonization, whether it's for to help us get to the next step in our human evolution, or that these hybrid children are going to be the next step in our evolution, which could be a really cool thing. It could mean that we're going to become galactic citizens, and we're going to be able to shift in and out interdimensionally, and take that next leap. Or it could be very biblical in nature, that everything that was kind of described in the Bible was true, and that we're dealing with perhaps angels and demons and the whole nine yards. Who knows? But the implications to humanity are so profound that that's why we're telling the story. We don't know the answers, right? It's fun to talk about the why, but whatever that is, whatever that end game is going to change everything forever.
John, through your interviews, and as you start to assemble the film together, a lot of stuff ends up on the cutting room floor on a hard drive, but in the old days. But and that was a funny joke, by the way.
It was.
Yeah, that was good stuff. There is a commonality between all of these experiences, and sometimes you can't get it all in one film, certainly. But for you start to see things there that the people that you're interviewing don't know what the other person has said in their interview, but you see the commonalities, and the dots are connecting. What did you start to take away from that, and can you share some of those commonalities between all of them?
The one thing that I again personally took away is the raw emotion that we were privileged, I think, to establish a positive rapport with long phone conversations ahead of time, and then to sit down. So imagine being one of these people being interviewed, and a crew of 5 people shows up and sets up lights and cameras and microphones, and then asks you to tell your personal story. So there's a lot of time spent making them feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable, and asking questions that give them pause, have them think, allow them to go deep. And when I was interviewing April, for example, I remember in that moment I was like, she was giving us incredible information, but I wanted more. So I said to her, I asked her, I said, April, can you close your eyes and just kind of take us to that moment and walk us through it? And when she did that, it became, for the people in the room, it became personal. It's like we were on this journey with her, and it was horrifying, because what she was basically sharing with us was a rape scenario. And I remember in that moment being kind of like shocked, and I said to her, and I didn't mean to be demeaning in any way, because it just hit me, out of nowhere. I said, April, you used the word rape. And she goes, well, that's what it was. And I just wanted clarity in that moment, because she said, I was taken against my will. I didn't volunteer for this. It wasn't something I gave approval to. And when you hear that level of emotion, and Geraldine Orozco, when we talked with her, and Rob Fullington, when we talked with him, the journeys that they took us through, we spent 9-10 hours with each one of them individually, and then another day with them as a group. But when we spent the time to get deep into their stories, to the point where they were able to share with us the vulnerabilities of those moments, that's what I took away as the most consistent thing that appeared over and over again. It showed up with Sierra, it showed up with Niara, it showed up with Melinda as well. Every single one of the people that we talked to, when they were able to get to a level of vulnerability, it was visceral. And I really wish that we could capture that level in an hour and 45 minutes. And I'm going to give us our a little plug here, because one of the things that we're going to do is we want to continue to tell these stories. And the best way that we can do it is not by going out and asking people to loan us money to make a film once a year. The best way that we can do it is to make content on an ongoing basis. And our team is willing to do that if we have the money to support us to do it. So we're going to be starting a Patreon account within the next few weeks. And our goal will be to share all of the interviews, the raw interviews. So we will have those available I would say most of their entirety in the coming months on this Patreon account, so that people can go on that journey that we went through and see some of the powerful moments that we weren't able to get into the film. I think it's really important to spend that time. And I think when people do spend the time that we spent with individuals, they will have a much better appreciation for the journey that they go through to get to that point of being vulnerable, to sharing the deepest, most disturbing, most amazing parts of their personal stories.
Well, I'm in. We'll help you support that. So just let us know when it's up and running, and we'll get it out there for you. We've got 2 minutes. I'll throw this over to Jack. Jack, the commonality between all of them was that. Let's get down specifically to types of beings. Was there? Is there one race of ET that is doing this, or is it multiple races? There are a lot of planets out there. There's 1 trillion planets in our Milky Way alone.
Well, it's like Clifford Stone says. There's 57 known ET races that have visited Earth, according to the military. Now, that's coming from a whistleblower and fascinating man. But most of the time, people there seem to be grays involved in these abduction scenarios, but it varies, and a lot of times there's more than one. Where you'll have some kind of a tall Nordic or a reptilian looking creature, or a sometimes insectoid looking creature in the background, and then the ETs are doing all the work and they're overseeing them. You hear that a lot, and a lot of times you hear about these tall Nordics as screen memories, as some kind of that they're not really tall, blonde, very attractive, human looking people. And the reason why we're being made to see them is for the experiencers to relax and be more comfortable. But in fact, they're not tall, blonde, Nordic-looking people. They're actually either reptilian or insectoid-looking ETs. So you tend to hear the same types of ETs. Mostly it's the grays. And some describe them as small as 3.5 feet tall to as tall as 6 feet tall, or even larger than that.
Let's take our next break right here. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we're discussing Extraordinary: The Seeding with director Jon Sumple and writer Jack Roth. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Simple enough. The conversation going on Twitter tonight is off the rails. I expected that. We are discussing the film Extraordinary: The Seeding with director Jon Sumple and writer Jack Roth. And I was watching some of the comments fly by here in Twitter, and they're moving too fast for me to keep up with. But the conversation right now is about Geraldine. And in Twitter, and one of the comments was she gives one of the best presentations on abductions and what is going on out there currently. How did you guys approach bringing her into the project?
We found out about her, I think it was from Lori and Fenton, made a recommendation to us to say, here's a story for somebody up in the Bay Area that you really should, listen to. So we gave her a call, and we spoke to her the first time. It was in, I think it was December of 2017. No, it must have been right early on in 2000. It might have been January. It was either December or January. And she was not very well known. She wasn't doing anything that was, I would say, grand at the time, as she is. I consider her a rock star now. And, we could say that we knew her when. Because during our first phone call, she was very, I would say, not reserved, but timid and not trying to overstate her story. She was very cautious. She didn't want to come across as someone who was overselling her story. She was very polite. She was very soft-spoken. And as we, got to know her over the course of a few phone calls, she opened up, more and more, and we learned more and more about her. But, her story to me is one of the ones that is an important one to tell, because the three principal people we have in there are April, Rob, and Geraldine. And three very, very different stories, and there's commonality between them. But one thing that I would urge people to notice in this film is that April has this kind of surprise by all the things that happened to her, and there's a little bit of a naivete as it pertains to ufology and it's in the grand scheme of things. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Right. I mean she's being exposed to it. She's learning all about it. You have Rob, who's gone through something so profound. He has even said that I feel more comfortable off planet than I do on planet. His consciousness is transforming as a result of what he's gone through. And Geraldine has had a pretty profound transformation. She was a very successful businesswoman. She had an experience in 2013 that really kind of woke her up to everything that she now knows and has been exposed to. And she, shortly after her experience, she started seeing somebody, eventually got engaged, shared her story after they started seeing each other, and was basically told by the individual, which a lot of people have said to partners who have gone through this is something you don't really want to talk about to friends and family and in your work, because it could be damaging. And if someday we have kids, what would they think if their mom was telling these stories? So she buried it for 4 years. And then in 2017, in January and February, she had back-to-back regressions and was exposed to profound information and experiences that she had been through, and a connection to the electromagnetic field and energy that was just like a flip of a switch, and she was connected. And after the first regression, she ended the relationship that she was in. And after the second regression, a month later, she quit her job and said, I need to dedicate my life to helping people who've been through what I've experienced. And she has dedicated her life since then to helping people. And, over the course of the last year and a half since we've engaged with her, it has been an amazing journey to see what she has done and the role that she is playing. So she is somebody who was in some ways reconnected to herself, her purpose, for lack of a better term, tapped on the shoulder that it's time to do work. And she responded to it in a very different way. So not everybody has this horrific experience that has them curled up in a ball. It's profound. It was horrific. If you talk to her, she'll say it was horrific. Every part of it was horrific. But she's transformed that into something and channeled that energy into something where she can help other people.
You're both members of the media, whether you want to admit it or not. It's your gig. It's what you do. Yeah. The last 2 years, we've seen the subject of UFOs completely explode. And it's never been like this in the history of this planet. Ultimately, I'll throw this over to Jack first. Jack, what do you think is going on here? Is this the media? Is this the media being guided by agencies and the Pentagon? Is this part of the status quo and pop culture pushing this forward? Is it ancient aliens' fault? I don't know. But what is going on here?
Well, I think the idea of the social media and global connection, and this, we're so much more connected now that it's harder I honestly think it's a slow drip. And I think that the government is trying to put feelers out there to determine, well, how are people going to react to this? How are people going to react to us saying, okay, the Pentagon knew that we were interested in UFOs and what they were, blah blah blah. So it's again slow drip. But I have to be honest, and I wouldn't have said this 7-8 years ago before we started doing the Stan Romanek story. But after we've done everything we've done, I honestly don't think that full disclosure is coming. And the reason I say that is at this point, they've committed crimes against humanity. I really believe that. I think that even if the end game is ascension and it's a next step in human evolution and we're all going to benefit from it, someone has to pay for the means to the end. And what they've done to people in this process is horrific. And it is literally something that is a crime. Some people being taken against their will. So I don't know if the government can backtrack and say, oh, we knew all along, we knew about this. But you know what? It was all good for humanity. So everything's honky-dory. I think that there have been very dark agendas associated with this, and I don't think that the government can just come out and say, hey, full disclosure, we knew, we're not alone. I just don't think it can happen.
John, what do you think is going on? Do you think it's the military driving this and the Pentagon and three-letter agencies?
I think, I try to look at it, this is going to sound, some people might think I'm nuts, but I try to look at this more from a cosmic perspective. And I don't mean that as a new agey point of view. I try to think of, from a universal cosmic approach that, if we all come from whether it's the Big Bang Theory or, if you believe in the biblical narrative in organized religion, that we come from source, we come from, a single energy, we come from God or a God or gods, whatever your belief system might be. So if these beings are out there doing the things that they're doing, they all come from the same beginning. So we are all connected in some way, shape, or form. What we can't comprehend is the connection. And that's the part I think that we have a very, very difficult time. I think a lot of the things that happen on planet Earth are all about controlling the masses. There's a lot of control mechanisms put in place to keep realities from people. And I'm not saying that from a conspiracy theory point of view. I'm saying that from just some of the obvious things that we see on a regular basis in the media, through politicians, through religion. There is a lot of controlling for the benefit. Sometimes they will say it was for the good of all people. And, Jack has mentioned this many times in our conversations and some of the interviews that we've done, is that a lot of times the government keeping information from us is healthy because we might not have a place for it. So think about during the Cold War, if something came out that there was something out there that had the power to take us over, and the immediate connection would be, well, the Russians have something, and that's bad. So at that time frame, there was a different mentality. So today we have a completely different perspective of it. I think we're a little bit more cosmically oriented than we were then, but not necessarily in a way that has us understanding that there's a new physics out there, that there is an ability to bend space and time, that there is the ability to travel long distances in a matter of seconds, and we just can't comprehend that. So I've said this before, is that, when you think about where we were 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, versus where we are today, no one in the past would have thought we would be where we are today. And no one would think, 500 years from now, or even 100 years from now, that we were in our right minds because we had this current belief system or structure or understanding of science or understanding of religion or understanding of the cosmos. So there's an evolution that goes on, and we're a part of something that is evolving and unfolding before our very eyes. And I really don't think disclosure comes from those in control. I think it comes from the people who are having the experiences and being brave enough to share them on a regular basis. It's just something that deserves more attention from free-thinking people and people who might be, never gave thought to it before.
Well, as the director of this film, you're expecting and hoping for reaction, good or bad. You want people to see the film. Right? You
Yes.
want those reactions. It's the same thing, I would suspect, coming from Washington, as this disclosure seems to be being rolled out, motivated by them. The reaction of the planet, I think we handled it pretty well, right? I don't think anybody jumped off of any buildings, did they?
No.
What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that we are more aware. We're more conscious, cosmically conscious, as Jon said. And I think we're ready. I think the general public is much more ready than they ever have been. I still think there are segments of society, whether it's due to indoctrination, old indoctrinations, that are still going to have a really hard time with that. If it's ever if it ever comes out that we aren't alone in the universe and we have been visited, I still think there will be people who have a hard time with it. But I think for the most part, we're as ready now as we ever have been. And I think we'll handle it a lot better. But again, I think they have a problem on their hands. They have a serious problem because they can't justify what's happened in the last 60 and 70 years. They just can't do it. So how do you come out all of a sudden and say, yeah, we've known, we've been in contact, and we are not alone in the universe, and meet our galactic neighbors. It's not that simple.
No, it's not that simple. And you're right about the abduction phenomenon and being taken against our will, that is something that's going to make a lot of people angry. But if this planet finds out that state actors have had in their possession, free energy, the ability to travel and transportation and heat homes and electricity and feed the world and feed people, that is a problem I don't think that they could overcome.
Agreed.
My cousin said to me, this was many, many, many years ago. Let's go 5 years ago. Might have even been, 5 years ago. And he said, this is my take. He said, finding out that we are not alone in the universe would allow the planet to have a reason to live. Okay? And he said, if we found out that we were alone in the universe, and that was the truth, then we don't have a reason to live. We might as well just burn this planet down. There's no reason to move forward, and that would throw everybody into a spiral of depression. And I thought that was one of the most profound statements, and it stuck with me. And if you really think about it, right? If we're not alone in the universe, then there's a reason to make friends and to move forward and to figure out how to get together. And, there's a reason to live overall. But if we're alone, who cares, right? It's just like, wow, what a strong statement. I think that we need to move forward in the other direction. I really think that we need to have a reason to stop fighting amongst each other and figure out how to be earthlings, without borders.
Well, one of the things that I've shared before, too, that I think is a very interesting take from and this might resonate with people who are sitting on the fence. And if you're listening, think about it from this point of view, is that one of when we screened the film, in the Stan Romanek film back in 2013 at the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival, I had a friend who went to the festival, watched the film, and she basically was going to support me. And we had a lot of people there that night that went to support us because Jack, Jamie, and I all have connections to South Florida. So we had it was a love fest, but everybody that left the theater that night, I think, was shocked by what they saw because they weren't expecting it. They weren't, fans of the genre necessarily. They were curious about what Jack, John, and Jamie did. And as a result of that, we had a lot of people who were, never really gave a lot of thought to it. Fence sitters, maybe didn't. And a couple people's like, I don't know if I agree, but you guys did a great job with the storytelling. But we had, several people come up to us after they were just kind of blown away. And I had one friend who didn't talk to me until a couple days after the screening. And she said, I really needed to think about it before I had a conversation with you, because I have to be honest with you. I never thought that this existed beyond science fiction films. I never thought that this is something that was happening to real people. And you basically, in the presentation of the film, blew my mind because I didn't have a place in my head for how this possibly could be happening to people today.
Were you surprised by that kind of reaction?
I wasn't, actually. I really wasn't, because I think there are people who in this world who are comfortable kind of with the way things are. Their life is not disrupted too badly, and they're enjoying their life. They're moving through life. They're moving through the things that happen to them on a daily basis, and don't spend a lot of time going beyond what is in front of them. And what is, there's a case to be made for being present, but there's also a case, I think, to be made for thinking about why we're here. What's next? Where are we going? How are we evolving? And one of the themes in the film, which I strongly encourage people to pick up on, and we have to thank Richard Dolan for this, because he mentioned it in the very beginning. And Richard was one of the I think the first expert interviews that we did. And before we started rolling the cameras, he mentioned Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he mentioned specifically his essay on circles, and he talked about the whole idea of expanding circles, and it's as we expand our thoughts all it does is encourages new questions. So once we figure something out, once we push the envelope, once we evolve to a new level of thought and existence, it opens up a whole bunch of new questions. We haven't figured anything out. We've just pushed the boundaries of knowledge and awareness further and further out. And when he said that, I was in that moment, I was like, this is really good. This is a great theme for the whole film. And it becomes a theme throughout the whole film, because that whole idea of whenever we expand thought, we just have to know that it's going to expand again and again and again. And I think it's foolish for us not to think that there's possibilities beyond what we currently understand today for us as humanity, for us as beings on this earth, and for us as galactic citizens. So if you think about it from that point of way, like you were mentioning earlier, it's kind of cool to think that there might be a connection to something much bigger than we currently understand today. The implications of it coming to fruition are profound, and they may be hard to grasp, but what's wrong with the idea of some of the science fiction films that we see today, where you have multiple, beings cohabitating on a planet or on a ship or on a space station? That seems like it could be more real than we've ever imagined before.
What I am afraid of, and especially in our 60-second news cycle, right? It's no longer 24 hours. We have a 60-second news cycle, that UFOs, ET, visitation, and extraterrestrial life will become passé. That will move past the subject. And people will actually lose interest, like they lose interest in everything the next day. It's like, be careful what you wish for, right? We have it out front right now. What if it's too much, too quickly, and the world just moves past it? Yeah, we're not alone. So what? You know what I mean?
I think that I don't think that will happen, and here's why. I think that ever since human beings have had self-awareness, from that very moment we had self-awareness, I think we asked 3 questions. All human beings ask them. And one of them is, are we alone in the universe? Mm-hmm. The second, is there a God?
What happens after we die?
And what happens when we die?
Right.
And those questions will always be, as long as we have self-awareness, those will be critical, the 3 critical questions human beings always ask.
But they've never been answered. I'll give you another example. You know what? I'm going to ask both of you right now. I'm looking at the clock. I'm not ready to end this conversation. You guys want to hang after the break and we'll do some overtime?
Sure.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. So then let me just say this. The moon, right? We went off planet, man. We went to the moon. Extraordinary, the most biggest event for mankind, right? Right. We can say that. We lost interest. we lost interest. It literally became yesterday's news. And that's what I'm afraid of here. We've finally gotten it out front and the media talking about it. What happens if we just become yesterday's news?
I don't think that can happen. And I think the reason why is it's not just, okay, in my thought process to that would be is that we have a tendency to think linearly. So to get from point A to point B is a direct line. So we look at going from Earth to the moon as something that is a process that requires us to travel in a direct line or in a sine wave, which is ultimately what it winds up being. But anyway,
sure.
You're going from A to B in the most convenient way possible, which is straight. Well, what if physics that we're not, I shouldn't say that hasn't been explored yet, has been explored and has been explored probably for close to 100 years. It's an alternative physics where there is the ability to bend space and time. So we evolved from Newtonian to Einstein physics. And what if we're going to, in our lifetime, it would be awesome, we expand that process to the next level of physics, a different understanding that we don't necessarily comprehend all the details, but the work is being done. So if that exists and that breakthrough happens, it's a whole different reality. It's like, wow, I didn't know that it was possible to go from, it's that whole idea of, like, say you draw a line on a piece of paper, and take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and turn it landscape size so that you have 11 inches, draw a point from one end to the other. And it's like, well, that's a long distance, measure it with a ruler. Okay, so it's an 11-inch journey. Well, what if you bend the paper so the 2 points touch each other? It's instantaneous travel. What if that exists?
I think we're close to, especially from the physics side, of understanding that. In that the math actually works. Now, it's a whole nother thing to turn that into a testable, laboratory setting where we can turn that into a reality. But certainly the math says that is possible. I totally agree. You got to start
there first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a break. Let's get into some overtime. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, director Jon Sumple and writer Jack Roth of the film Extraordinary, The Seeding. I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. That's it. Let's do some overtime. We'll continue the conversation right after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I am your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Tonight we've been discussing the film Extraordinary, The Seeding. It is releasing on September 3rd. We have director Jon Sumple and Jack Roth, the writer of the film, here. We're going into some overtime. And where can everybody check out the trailer for the film before the release?
The best place to see it, to get additional information on the film, as well, is at extraordinarytheseeding.com. The trailer's on there. There's also a music video, and I want to give a shout out to my son, who wrote the song that is the single release from the film, wrote and performed the song that is in the closing credits, and there's a music video for that. Definitely want people to check both of those out, the trailer, the song, but also have a chance to see a little bit of synopsis of the film, as well as the different awards the film has won. So we've been selected into 15 different film festivals, and we've earned awards in 4 different festivals, including 2 best documentary films. So we're pretty proud, and we really would love for people to go and check that page out and watch the trailer, and you can even pre-order the film on Vimeo heading into the release on the 3rd.
Now, I wanted to ask you guys, I want both of your reactions on this. Here we have this huge crest, this wave of UFOs in the media, and what is going on, of course, with television too as well, and programs like this. But with all of this happening at the same time, the release of your film, so many films from the Orchard and 1091 over the last year or two as well. So we have all of this, right? It's like overwhelming. And the last thing you would expect is something like the Storm Area 51 event, where and the reason why I'm bringing this up is that the interest from the general public in this subject is tangible. It's not fake. It's real. And then to just kind of prove the point, where something comes along like the Area 51, the Storm Area 51 event, where you have over 2 million people there. Some of them may be clicking just because they think it's funny. But when you have 2 million people, the slice of the pie that is taking this subject very serious is something that is grabbing everybody's attention, isn't it? This is a subject on this planet right now that is being talked about.
Yeah, and it might be the kind of thing.
There's a penalty. Throw the penalty
flag. Yep.
First time.
Well, you had to do it during overtime, too.
Go, Jack.
Go ahead, Jack. You were first, actually.
Okay. Well, I lost my train of thought. But okay, no, right. So, no, I think that it's we might be reaching that critical mass that we always talk about, that tipping point of finally enough people are paying attention and they're willing to open their minds and consider the possibilities where things might actually change. The Area 51 thing is really interesting, and it's also theater, right? I mean, I know there are certain people out there who are waiting to see who's going to get shot when that happens. I mean, there are people like that, and unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to end very well. But the one good thing is that it's drawing attention to the subject, and people are interested. And yeah, we have to gauge that. And if the government and our military, if they're putting feelers out there, this could be one of those things where they say, "Whoa, wait a minute, hold on a second. We might have an enormous amount of people at Area 51 soon." And I'm not going to say they might not storm the gates, but even if they're all out there and it turns into a Woodstock, I mean, that's, hey, that's, it's drawing, there's attention being given to it. So it's something that has to be considered for sure.
John, what do you think is ultimately going on? 2 million people, right? Another 3 million like RSVP'd. I said maybe. We're 5 million people responded to that page. That's ginormous by any standard.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, depending on how it plays out, whether it's good or bad, I assume it's going to be mostly positive. I think it's going to be more of a logistical nightmare than anything. I don't think it's going to be Fire Festival awful, but I think there's going to be a lot of problems with infrastructure. There's no gas stations. There's no food and water out in those areas. So I think a lot of people who want to make a buck are going to go out there with truckloads of goods to make sure that the people are hydrated and fed and taken care of. So but really ultimately what it does is it brings something that has been mostly a fringe subject into a bigger audience. It drives it to a bigger audience. And like Jack said, there's going to be a lot of people waiting to see how it goes bad. And that's what they're going to be like, look at all the Looney Tunes out there. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of theater there. And I think that, me personally, I'm not a big fan of the dressing up as, aliens and parading around, because I think that demeans it a little bit. It just reminds me of the scene in Contact, the movie where, there's this thing out in the desert and everybody goes, it's a little bit crazy over the top. But it's still, regardless of whatever happens, it's bringing attention to something that has never gotten this level of publicity ever before. That's a good thing.
The wave that is happening right now, the media stopped laughing. Right, that's the thing that shocked me the most. The media stopped laughing. We don't want them to start laughing again. And that's where the Storm Area 51 event, just when we were starting to get some street cred, right, for this community, this comes along, and it feels like it's an opportunity for us to go backwards instead of forwards.
Yeah, I could see that as a big negative for sure. If it goes sideways, if it becomes too much of the over-the-top theater, or if there's, a half a dozen, Humvees that try to break through, the doors or the fences, and the government will be on high alert. There's no doubt about that. There will be a presence there. I don't think it's going to be there'll just be a caution. But I think the local municipalities, the county, they've already declared a state of emergency, and it's over a month away. So when you think about it from that point of view, I think the stories that could come out of it may have nothing to do with the subject matter, which that would be unfortunate.
Well, I know I'm going to ask you the questions, kind of like your film. I'm going to ask you the question that everybody's thinking about, but nobody will address, and I will certainly do it. And do you think that our government on American soil, not overseas, I'm talking about in the state of Nevada, would actually shoot upon American citizens? Right? That's the real question here. That is the you know what I mean? Let's forget about everything else. Porta potties and water are one thing, but would our government, if there's 10,000 people outside of that gate, they start pushing, would they fire upon American citizens?
I think the answer to that is yes. This happens during when people are marching and, rioting and whatnot. They have to be geared up for that. And it's just the way it is. I mean, it is a secret. It's a military base. No one's supposed to be on it. But yeah, I do. I believe that. I think that they will absolutely, we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen over the past, 10 years, when we've seen certain incidents where there's a peaceful demonstration that turns ugly, and that's a peaceful demonstration. That's not on a top secret military base where there might be a UFO underground or in an airplane hangar. So they have to be really careful. I would imagine that the government and the military is really skittish about this right now, because I think this is something that if it was originally a hoax and all of a sudden now it's gained momentum. And they have to be asking these questions. I guarantee you they're in a room right now. They're in a war room asking the same. What do we do if they storm the gates? Do we shoot? Do we actually fire on people?
Can you imagine the backlash? John, I want you to answer the same question, by the way. But could you imagine, with all of the media that's going to be out there live on television, all the Facebook and YouTube, Periscope, live streaming that is going to be going on, that some 15-year-old kids, are shot in the desert? I don't know if I want to. I don't know. John, what do you think? Do you think our government would shoot into a crowd?
I think they will be stocking up on rubber bullets and a lot of tear gas.
Beanbags.
I think, beanbag stuff. So anything that they can do to avoid casualties, beyond some bruises and some, people getting the wind knocked out of them. I think they'll try to avoid that at all costs, but also be justified in the event that people do something ridiculous, and I think most of the people that are going for the, it is like a Woodstock. It's never happened before. I want to be there when it happens to see.
Are you going to go? Are you going to go?
I'll be in Peru, so I won't be able to make it.
I'll get you I survived Storm Area 51 T-shirt.
Well, I know a lot of people are going to definitely monopolize and make money off of this event, but I think there is some spectacle to it. There is a huge fun element to it. There is a lot of seriousness to it by the organizers originally, and I know Joe Rogan kicked this all off and kind of got it. The conversation started, and people took it and ran with it. And I think maybe what's going to be the Jimmy Church event? What's your catalyst moment that's going to get people to is it something? I mean, that to me, it's going to take people in the media willing to risk telling stories, willing to challenge the public to raise their awareness, to do some research, to challenge the paradigms that we've been programmed to believe. Those are the things I think that are going to be. It's not going to come from someone, going to Area 51 or Dulce on their own and trying to climb a fence. That's not going to do anything. Having events like this, where it creates an opportunity for awareness, it could be a good thing. But I would also, say that if there is a strong presence to storm the gates, and the military does respond in a way that is horrific, that will send a very strong message that there's something being hidden there.
It could backfire. You're absolutely right. And this is I wish for two things. This is my predictions, or not my predictions. These are my two wants. I think, and I said this probably 5 or 6 years ago, I think we should do a 1 million person disclosure walk right up the Washington Memorial, right up and do that in Washington, and do a nice visible disclosure / exposure type of event. I think that's what we should do, and certainly the interest in Storm Area 51 indicates to me that we should have done this a long time ago when I first talked about it. That's number one. My number two is, and I know that all of the agencies listen to this show, right? They're listening right now. They're listening to you two. And so my message to them would be this. At the gates, if it actually happens at the back gate or the front gate of Area 51, where you have 4, 5, 10,000 people show up, or more, it could be, I don't know, it could be 500, is open up the gates, bring up a couple of buses, invite a couple of hundred to jump on the bus and take them onto the base. Take them onto the base, show them around. The good stuff is hidden, right?
Right. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant idea.
That's what I would do, and the rest, I'd bring in Domino's and some In-N-Out burger taco trucks, and feed everybody and kumbaya. That's what I would. Brilliant. That's what I would do. I wouldn't try to get into an adversarial position, because a crowd is a crowd, and if they want to push through that gate, there's not a whole lot to push through there. There's not. They could just walk. They can walk through it.
It won't take much. If there's that many people there to push down a gate.
So that's what I would do. That's what I would do.
I like your first point, and I think somebody listening tonight should get that petition underway. It'll take off. It'll get a life of its own, and back up the event at Area 51 with the March on Washington later this year or early next year, and we keep the conversation going.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, I think that's the game changer. You know, right now, I hate to say it, right? Strike while the iron is hot. But
it has to. I completely agree.
We're right there. And the media and the ability today, this is what was so wonderful about the different peaceful government changes that have gone down in the last few years. Certainly, look what happened in Armenia last year. That's crazy. An actual peaceful overthrow of the government, right? There's a little violence, but it is possible to do that. And why not? Right now, with the ability to have our own media, without the mass media, live streaming, none of the shenanigans can go down, right? We have the ability to document everything in real time, unless the government decides to shut down the internet. When that's not going to happen. Right? Are you guys with me?
Right.
That's
no.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what something like this might do too? It'll move the needle on the political will, because right now the political will to find answers isn't really there. And there's a little bit of it, but imagine there's going to be some congressmen out there who are looking at the numbers, and they're going to say, "Wow, a good amount of my constituents want to know the answer to this. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get ahead of this, and I'm going to be like, he's going to become the hero. He or she is going to become the hero." So the political will to push and get things done and get answers, that might become more likely to happen. So that's a good thing.
Well, I agree with that. And I see something happening here. Right now, in that we've got these hearings, closed door, about UFOs with the Senate and Congress. Certainly the Pentagon is talking about it. We got President Trump mentioned it to Tucker Carlson, and so that's a pretty rare thing. Do you actually see the UFO card becoming part of the election in 2020? Where this is something that could be part of somebody's campaign?
Well, Bernie Sanders' wife wants disclosure, so that's a start. You never know. You never know what somebody's. I don't think that would ever be. It's not a big enough. It's not a collective consciousness moment yet, but I could see it down the road. Maybe maybe after the event in September in your March on Washington that will be coming up shortly after.
You've already booked my March on Washington.
But I think those are the type of things that kind of someone like Jack said is going to catch on to this and see there's a way to leverage this into a positive for me. And they will, and they'll do it in a way where, it turns out well for them. And leveraging that moment in time to ride the wave. I really think that there is a chance that those type of things could happen. I don't know if it's going to make it at the presidential level, but I could definitely see it be something that starts at a congressional level and at the senatorial level, and it could be something that people latch onto. Definitely locally, it will.
If we brought. Man, I think I've opened up a can of worms here. But if we brought a crowd of 10 or 15 or 20,000 people to the or a million, but 20,000 to the steps of the Capitol, do you think that you could get the Senate majority leader or minority, to come down the steps and address the crowd about UFOs? Or do they continue to deny it and ignore it?
Well, I think congressmen are in a different position than, say, people maybe perhaps in the CIA or the NSA. I think a lot of times they're in the dark too. Your run-of-the-mill congressman may not know the answers, and they might be asking the same questions we're asking. And they might, they'd be like, well, why don't, they say only a few presidents even have really known the truth about the UFO story. And George Bush Sr. was one of them because he was the head of the CIA.
Sure.
So, so he had that access. So most congressmen don't have that top secret level kind of access to that information. So they want to know. If I was a congressman, I was well-educated, you're well-educated, you have constituents, I would want to know. I think that the answer to that is when it starts affecting people directly. The things that are important to people, what do people vote on? They vote on taxes. They vote on things that direct their pocketbook. It affects their pocketbook, right? It affects them directly. It affects their children's education. I think it's going to take an event, the kind of event that all of a sudden is going to make that subject and that topic important to people. Now, maybe it's a global warming thing. Maybe it's a climate change. Maybe things get to the point where things get so bad,
right?
And there's the suggestion that, you know what, we may have the technology to fix all of this tomorrow, or we have galactic neighbors that could fix this for us tomorrow. There's something that's going to become so critical for us that it's going to become the number one issue in a presidential campaign.
Storm Langley, Virginia.
I love it.
Oh, man, you're going to hear this show go beep, beep, beep in just a second. But you know what? The both of you, Jon and Jack, thank you so much. The film is truly amazing, and on the 3rd, we'll make a big announcement and push it out in social media for you. But a lot of work was put into that film, and you guys are very, very courageous to go into a zone that so many others were afraid to do. And I want to thank you on the behalf of the community for getting this film together. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to get you guys back on the show. You're working on a new film. We can talk about that later, but I'm really excited about our next conversation. Thank you so much. Oh, got to give Lori a shout out. Thank you so much, Lori. You're a trooper for putting all of this together over the last month. And there you go. Thank you guys so much. Oh, are you guys gone?
No, thank you,
Okay.
Jimmy. We really appreciate it.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Okay,
You too.
Bye-bye.
Right on. Jon Sumple and Jack Roth. Now, the film Extraordinary the Seating, it's very simple. We have the links up in Twitter and over at jimmychurchradio.com. It is extraordinarytheseating.com, where you can go read all about the film, the backstory, and the trailers are right there. The release is on September 3rd. With that wraps another amazing week here on Fade to Black. We're going to head into the weekend. On Saturday, Rita and I will be out at Steve Neal's art show out in Oxnard, and we have the links up for that too as well. So we hope to see all of you there on Saturday afternoon and evening. That's where we will be. With that, everybody enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you here on Monday. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Very special thanks to Jon Sumple and Jack Roth. I will be seeing all of you on Monday. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camarion. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy. SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. I'll see you guys on Saturday out at Steve Neal's place. But I'll also see you on Monday. Be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.